Thank you for those of you teams that have joined us for Ask an Agronomist. This is kind of your chance to learn a little bit more about the crop scouting competition. Maybe some of you have questions, just kind of want to know what resources and stuff you have. So I have some of my colleagues with me tonight. I'll have them introduce themselves as we go on throughout. But I anticipate this to be kind of just a short little debriefing, just kind of know what to expect. So obviously most of you probably know it's at the Research Center out near Meade on August 2nd. And so this is a schedule if we do have some new participants on here. Registration will be from 8:30 to 9 o'clock. Kind of have like a light breakfast sponsored by the University of Nebraska Doctor of Plant Health. We'll do kind of orientation, go over the rules, that kind of stuff, which I'll get into here in a little bit. We kind of, because of COVID, well, before COVID, we used to do kind of a written test, and everybody took that individually. We scored it, and then did kind of the team average. And after COVID, we did Kahoot. So it's just been kind of been a fun little thing. You can all kind of get in your little groups, work on that together. So make sure that each team has access to one device to respond. So whether that's an iPad or a phone, just make sure you have a device there with you. Then we will break out into the field scouting rotations, which are worth most of the points. So throughout this, the teams will have 15 minutes to answer the questions as well as rotate through the stations. We'll have the judges all there at the stations. I'll have kind of a little air horn that'll tell you where you need to go. After about 2 hours approximately of that, we will convene together for lunch. We'll finalize the results, have the awards portion, and then kind of the last part, which I think is a really huge highlight, just kind of a fun, informal, educational piece. Even for the coaches, I've learned, we'll go ahead and kind of debrief the scouting plot exercises. So you'll learn, whether you were right, wrong, indifferent, that kind of thing. So then this is a schedule that we have now. So just kind of again, just for example, Arlington FFA, you'll rotate through all of those stations. We have 7 stations set up this year. And fortunately, we've had 8 teams register, which is a record number. And the last one, you'll have a break. So you can go back up into the center there at NREC, use the restrooms, just kind of cool down, chill out. For those of you other ones that maybe have a break in the middle, if there's last minute cramming or anything you want to do, you can feel free to go ahead and do that. And again, I will send this updated schedule to all of the coaches. So some of the key resources that you're probably going to see a lot of our extension faculty and staff talk about tonight. First of all, we have the corn and soybean pocket field guide. So I kind of did a little picture of that. If you do not have one of those, I would first encourage you to contact your local extension office, because hopefully they have some of those available. I could send them to you. I'm not sure if they'll get there kind of in time, that kind of thing, but they're a great guide to have. I'll have a few extra there for you to use. The other guide that is really good to take a look at is the 2023 Guide for Weed, Disease, and Insect Management. So again, that's a good guide. It's available for $25, and I don't know for sure. Tamara, maybe you know the better answer to that, how long it takes to actually ship out, but typically, at least as an extension, when we order those publications, they come really quick, but you can also download it online for $15, or again, talk to your extension office. So some other things to bring. So any crop scouting guides that you might have. So again, we already talked about the Nebraska one. If you have other guides you want to use, you are certainly welcome to do that. Kind of a backpack or bag just to put it all in. Usually they're at NREC, pretty good about having some insect repellent or sunscreen, but if you have some yourself, you might want to bring some of that. A water bottle, if it's hot and humid like it is today, we want to make sure everyone stays hydrated and safe. Some kind of a tape measure in case we do some exercises that require that. Just a notebook in case you want to take notes, doing some calculations, just have that along with the pen and pencil. And of course, in Nebraska, we never know what the weather will be. So some kind of, I call it weather ready gear. So it could rain. I think about half of the time that I've been doing this, it's rained. And half the time it hasn't. So again, just kind of be prepared with all those types of things. The next is weed identification. I do not see Erin on here, but Erin is the one that is facilitating that. So I would just say that probably one of the biggest things to do or to prepare yourself for studying is to get a copy or obtain the weeds of the Great Plains. If you don't have that, just use whatever other weed identification resource you might have. You could borrow it from your extension office if they have it, but it is a really good resource to use, or any other weed identification key that you have, whether that's electronic or whether it's a paper copy. But I do know that rather than just identifying, say, like 10 weeds, there will likely be some questions about, what would some chemistries be that would effectively treat these types of weeds and some other application pieces. So it's not just like a weed identification portion of this. Also, I should mention that every single of the field exercises is worth 20 points. So the judges will basically score you accordingly. And we'll have this in kind of the big room next to the auditorium. Next, we have entomology, and I don't think I see Bob or Kyle on. But these are kind of the resources, again, that they told us to study and take a look at. So the soybean and cord pocket guide, like we talked about in the beginning. And you'll also see a common theme. Just take a look at some of the articles on our cropwatch.unl.edu website. So, just take a look at what's going on in entomology. I think Tamara has some other plugs there later on for pathology. But then he does have these specific extension circulars that you can take a look at. And the good thing is I will email out this PowerPoint as soon as we are done right here to all of the team coaches, and just kind of so how to take a look at that. Tamara or anyone else have anything to add about that? Okay. Next, I believe is Dirk.
Yeah, so my section is general scouting, and we'll have a precision ag slant to it. We're going to focus on soil sampling, and there'll be a four-wheeler there to kind of look at. Might have you label some parts of it that are important for soil sampling. And then I've listed 4 different sources that you can look at from Nebraska to better understand how do we do grid sampling, how do we do composite sampling, zone sampling. And then that third one down for soil testing, the second part of the test will be you get a soil analysis report. In this case, it'll be potassium. So you'll find out that, in this sample, it's like 200 parts per million for potassium. And then the question will be, well, how much potash should you add for that particular spot? So that's kind of the general idea for the general scouting and precision ag. Any questions? And these references, there's no links, but you should be able to write in those titles and put UNL and they should show up through Google.
And you should all be able to unmute yourself if you do have a question. We want this to be totally informal. Otherwise, type something in the chat. but we'll keep moving forward. Soybean diseases, Tamara, you are going to cover that, correct?
Yes, I thought Kyle might be able to join us, but maybe not. So Kyle has provided a couple of resources here. These are some of the same resources that I would recommend for some of the corn diseases as well that I'm going to be talking about, and we want to make sure that you're familiar with. And so we have the pocket guide that Brandy's already mentioned. That's important to us. We also have quite a few resources up on the cropwatch.unl.edu website. One of my personal favorites, though, is the Crop Protection Network. And this is one, I'm going to go ahead and advance my, or maybe you can advance my slide to the next one, because I think, well, I must have that on the next slide. But in any case, I wanted to emphasize that there's it's okay, Brandy. I
Okay,
just want to
sorry.
emphasize it's okay. I don't know. I must have deleted it accidentally.
Were
But
you wanting me to go to the link or the website?
no, that's okay. I
Okay.
just want to emphasize, though, there's so many resources on the Crop Protection Network. This is a compilation of resources of all the different land-grant university extension pathologists that work together. And so these resources are fantastic, and it's not just specific publications on diseases. There's actually other resources, such as how to estimate percent of leaf area covered by some diseases. There's ways to estimate yield loss. There's defoliation estimations. And so there's a lot of things on that website that you might not be aware of. And so we also talk on there about each year and rank the diseases on which ones are the most important. And so also talking about why that is. Is that because of certain weather conditions? Because those are very important for diseases. And so Kyle was going to talk about a few of the common diseases in soybean, things that we worry about. And some of the things in particular in soybean that we might be seeing at the time. And so one thing that's kind of a hot topic just starting up this week that we're starting to talk more about is white mold. And so white mold is a really important disease to us when it does develop. It needs moisture. And now that we're seeing it show up, this is going to become an important problem for some of our producers this year. Probably be a good idea to be able to recognize something like white mold. Frog eye leaf spot, very important to us too, those spots on little soybean leaves. And an added bonus is we now have fungicide resistance documented in that fungus in Nebraska. And so there's a few tidbits of information making that one important as well. Phytophthora root and stem rot is important. That's not just a seedling disease. It can develop anytime during the year. And so Dylan Mangel is working on that. Kyle probably talk a little bit about that one as well. But the biggest soybean disease, soybean cyst nematode. And actually, it causes a disease, but we don't have a name for that disease. And so the nematode itself is what we spend our time focusing on. And so to know whether or not you've got it, you really need to collect and submit a soil sample for nematode analysis. Although if you know what you're looking for, you can carefully dig up those affected soybean plants and see the tiny females on those roots. And so they're difficult to see until you know what you're looking for. They're significantly smaller than our nitrogen nodules that are on there, but they cause the biggest yield losses of any disease in soybean. Transitioning to corn. So this is my area. And so I work with corn diseases in Nebraska Extension, and I just have a little smattering of photos that I've shared on here for you to look at, because there are some things showing up right now that are causing some concern and alarm among our producers and our crop consultants. And so every year about this time, we start watching closely for things like southern rust to develop. We already have common rust, though, and so it's important that we know how to tell common rust and southern rust apart. And there's resources for that on Crop Protection Network as well as Crop Watch itself. This year, though, we're seeing a lot of bacterial leaf streak. And notice in that photo, bacterial leaf streak sometimes looks a lot like gray leaf spot, the common fungal disease. But you can't control bacterial leaf streak with a fungicide. And so it's important we know which one is which. And so look for when you backlight it, holding it up to the sun, those bright yellow lesions that bacterial leaf streak uh, leaves behind. That'll help you tell it apart from the really smooth rectangular lesions of gray leaf spot that's there on the right side. Two more diseases that might be easily confused because they have large, similar shaped and sized lesions. Goss's bacterial wilt and blight, that's over here on the left-hand side in the middle. You might see in that picture that there's some dark freckles on the edges of that lesion like we have here. Even that those bacteria might give it a sparkly appearance. Now, those are two things that you'll never see any other disease do. And so if you know what to look for, that's going to help you really identify this one. We especially see it when plants are wounded, and we've had wounding this year, right? We've had a lot of hail in some places, other severe weather like high winds that'll do that. So we're starting to see some Goss's wilt showing up in parts of the state. Northern corn leaf blight has been developing for quite a while. That's a fungal disease, but it can make big lesions too, and those are usually rounded on the ends, kind of cigar shaped. Sometimes you see a dusty black junk in the middle of them. Those are spores that are being produced and splashed around. Those two can be confused with each other, though. And finally, probably in the biggest headline everybody has questions about this year is tar spot. Where is it? What's it going to do? And so I think it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with some of the distribution maps that we share, like the tar spot IPM pipe site. And if you go on there, you're going to notice that we've confirmed tar spot historically in the easternmost 31 counties of the state. And that happens to include Saunders County, where the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center is. And even this year, we've seen some of this disease in that location and nearby. And so my bet would be we'll continue to see some of these things get worse over time as long as the weather conditions are favorable. And that could just be irrigation. And sometimes overhead irrigation splashes them around, keeps it humid enough for it to get worse. You see that black spot on the leaf. There's not many other things that do that except for insect frass. Most black spots right now is bug poop, okay? And so one way to tell those apart is that tar spot is a fungus and it's embedded in the leaf, and you can't scratch tar spot off. You can't rub it off. You might have to wet it to help rub that off if it's insect frass, but tar spot doesn't rub off. And when you flip the leaf over, you should see it start to come through on the bottom side as well. And so that's a couple tips for telling those apart. And it'll continue to march west across the state over the next few years. And so it's good for everyone to learn how to identify tar spot. One other disease, finally, that people are confusing with tar spot is Physoderma brown spot. And we're seeing a smattering of that showing up right now, sometimes pretty severe in a few fields. And so in that picture on the right, notice that the lesions actually look different, whether they're in the midrib down that center, where they're often very dark purple or black, versus brown, which is the name of the disease, brown spot. When it's on the leaf blade along the edges, you see that. And so that should show you that these lesions look different depending on where they're at on the leaf. That's a huge clue as to what this disease is. And so if you run across that, hopefully that'll help you tell it apart and not get it confused with things like tar spot or southern rust. So that's all I have for corn and soybean diseases today. I can't join you that day. I'll be with my class that week, but I wish you all luck and a great time out at NREC with my colleagues. Thanks, everybody. It's exciting to have so many teams this year.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. Yeah, we'll have Amy Timmerman be joining with the corn diseases part. So thanks, Tamara, for covering that piece there. Again, if you have questions, please let me know. Oops, totally went okay. Mess up there. Okay. So again, type questions in the chat box or anything else. And next, I believe we have John Nelson, who's on tonight as well. Oh, John, I think you're muted there. Sorry.
Right again.
All good.
So I'm the water and crops extension educator in Lancaster, Cass, and Odo counties. This is my first year being involved in this competition, so I'll probably be learning some with you guys as well. Like everybody else has said, the field guide is always a good reference. I know it's sacrilege to have somebody from Kentucky teach Nebraska people about corn, but I've found this is a pretty good video, just explaining how a corn plant develops and how an ear develops and fills and matures. So I think we'll look at some of those things about ear fill and maturity. So I like that video. Another thing is this NEB guide on row spacing and seeding rate. Now this particular publication also talks about narrow rows and skip rows. That won't really be applicable to what we're doing, but there's sections on population and how that affects development, and we might see some effects on the plots out there from moisture stress. So those are some things to think about when you're planning for planting, seeding rate, and looking at weather conditions. And so that's something we'll think about, how an ear fills at different seeding rates. So that publication will talk some about that, and that video from Kentucky kind of covers that too. So those are some of the things to think about: population and just development related to that.
John, are you originally from Kentucky, or you just found that?
No, I'm from Colorado. So
oh, that's what I
almost
thought. Okay, I was
exact.
like, that's okay, because we appreciate all of our other land grant universities. I've used some of their, articles and stuff as well. So, yep, no worries.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, they do a good job with the camera, and the visuals are pretty good. He explains it pretty well, so I like that video.
So we actually do have a question, so anyone can help answer. Do you know the reason to why some corn plants try and grow an ear on the tassel? Fair game for anyone.
I think part of that is a genetic interaction. Some of the hybrids are just more prone to doing things like that, and especially when some of them are under stress. And so sometimes personally, I've seen that on the edges of fields where it's maybe not getting as much moisture or more damage. Tassel ear, I think we call that, right? Other than that, other than the genetic by stress, I don't have another good explanation. Anybody else?
That's what I've heard, but I'm not the expert either.
That's pretty good.
So yeah, thanks Wesley and Sophia for providing a question. Appreciate that. Other questions? Otherwise, John, were you done or anything else?
Yeah, I think that's all I had.
Okay. Okay, well, we will move on here. So Tamara, I guess you kind of already covered this. This is corn and soybean disease resources. So again, the cropprotectionnetwork.org, along with cropwatch.unl.edu/plant disease. And the last was soybean growth and development. I know Nathan was not able to be with us today. But I know he had mentioned again the pocket guide, which you've heard about. He also has kind of another challenge for some of you. So he is being a little more specific about reviewing some of these herbicide labels. So he provides these resources, and I can totally copy and paste this in on an email. I do not expect everyone to try to copy this all down, but take a look at the Liberty, Enlist Duo, and Roundup Power Max herbicide labels. Again, even though you all will have those resources like I'm pretty sure he was planning on printing these labels and stuff for you. You only have 15 minutes. And so, you don't know necessarily what the scenario is for these particular labels, even thinking back to like Dirk's exercise with soils and those types of things. So, if you want to be really prepared, try to take a look at those ahead of time, print them out, and that way you can kind of familiarize yourself with that. And then, he'll talk or ask the question. So, we also encourage, the judges in the scenarios to kind of be some of the questions that we get in extension. So, farmer so-and-so is calling and they have a question about this. What do I do? And so you all, as being future agronomists, have that, potential ability to help walk through some of these potential answers. So again, I will send this out. I will even copy and paste the links in there so you don't have to worry about writing all those links down and stuff. But again, just kind of another piece to add a little more, complexity to just, how do you identify the growth stage of soybeans and those types of things, because we want you all to be, well prepared and stuff for regionals, those of you that happen to win and so on and so forth. So with that, would take any questions or anything you have. So this, I just did a screenshot. This is a crop scouting resources webpage. So if you've never been there, just take a really quick look at, there's basically some PowerPoints that show different examples. So for example, looking at like crop injury, what might be some examples, what could happen, man-made or otherwise. And then with that, again, here's my contact information. So please feel free to, contact me if you have questions or anything. And also, again, putting a plug in for all of you to kind of put this on your calendars. The regionals is September 18th, and it's in Nebraska. And so right now, I will just mention we have Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana for sure that are going to compete in regionals this year. So that's 10 teams because we take the top 2 of each state. Next year, we will be adding Kentucky as well as Missouri to the mix. Kentucky, for those of you who might not know, the research center was impacted by a tornado last year, and they just haven't been able to quite rebuild and get to that point. Missouri, this was going to be their first year, but they just didn't quite have enough teams to get going and stuff. So, again, this is the closest it's ever going to be. It'll also be out there at NREC. And so I kind of joke, I was like, sometimes Iowa is a team to beat. So maybe I have to cut this out before I post this everywhere. But again, just want you all to have an awesome time, awesome experience. Some of the most rewarding things that have happened, at least, or I feel are awesome, is that we've had several teams, several individual members that have participated in this competition, go on to go to the University of Nebraska or other places, major in like agronomy or a related area, Tamara's pathologist, Dirk has like the geneticist background and everything else. And so they've actually come back to whether it's their family farm or business. And that's one of our goals, because in agriculture, we need lots of awesome and amazing agronomists or agricultural workers to kind of help move everything forward. So that is what I have. If you have any questions, I don't think I see anything else here in the chat box, but that's what we have. Again, I'll post this or I'll email this to the advisors along with some of those other links. And anything anyone else has to add from the UNL team?
So Brandy, will they be able to use their phones?
So I do leave that up to the judges at the site. So if the judges say that's okay, then that's okay across the board. But other things to potentially think about adding, I guess I didn't have that on the list, is a calculator. NREC, sometimes if you've not been there, we kind of go down that little hill, and sometimes there's good reception, sometimes there's not. So granted, a calculator shouldn't take all that, but don't never count on cell phone reception, because you never quite know.
So it sounds like typical crop scouting in Nebraska.
See any other questions? So I appreciate all of you for taking time to either participate live or hopefully later on join us later when maybe you're watching the recording. And that is all that I have. So I'm going to stop the recording